Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. According to Tuesday, August 26 spoilers on The Young and the Restless, Sally Spectra will have cause for concern as Billy Abbott investigates further. Here's what viewers can expect from Tuesday's YNR episode, which will also include Kane Ashby opening up. Kane will be dragged into another meeting shortly after concluding his meeting with Victor Newman for blackmail. This one won't be as tense because Billy will be handing Kane an alcoholic beverage and making him his friend. Although Kane might not disclose the specifics of Victor's extortion of Billy, Billy might express sympathy to Kane on their shared contempt for Victor. In any event, Billy will attempt to gradually gain Kane's trust and hope that he would provide more information. Kane will talk about the past 6 years and his activities after Billy discreetly probes for information. Kane regrets that his deceit damaged Lily Winters and the children, but he was afraid of failing and felt compelled to keep his new kingdom apart. Kane will chat about life outside of Genoa City and maybe how it will be to get used to returning home. By the end of this discussion, Billy could want to build a strong partnership with Kane that he can rely on. Naturally, Billy will be covertly planning to defend Jabot, assist Jack Abbott, and get Chancellor for himself. Sally will therefore be on edge if she hears any additional information about Billy and Kane spending time together. It's obvious that Sally worries about Kane and his potential. Sally will have good reason to be concerned about Tuesday's show because she is aware that Billy frequently takes unnecessary chances. According to teasers for The Young and the Restless, Sally will still worry about what Billy is getting himself into, but she will find time to focus on the upcoming launch party. For almost an hour, Sally had been pacing her apartment, her red hair slipping out of the bun she had pulled so securely in the morning. Normally, she wouldn't allow nerves to control her, but recently, she felt as though every fiber of her being was restless and being pulled in different directions by whispers that she couldn't seem to get rid of. Secrets were never kept hidden for long in Genoa City, and Sally Spectra was well aware that when people began to come out, the truth had a way of coming full circle like an unstoppable storm. She felt uneasy not only because of her own convoluted past or her complicated present with Adam, but also because she had a bad sense that Billy Abbott and Kane Ashby, two men who had far too much history, were going to enter an area that may alter everything. She couldn't get rid of the idea that the consequences wouldn't end with them once they started talking and revealed long-held secrets and wounds. Her loved one's life would be impacted, and she might even be drawn directly into the middle of the chaos. Sally had attempted to comprehend Billy but was never able to fully grasp his complexity. He carried guilt with him everywhere he went, and he had a knack of being endearing one moment and destructive the next. Although she appreciated his honesty, it was frequently tinged with remorse or wrath. Kane, however, was not like that. Although he appeared to be stable, everyone in Genoa City knew that he had secrets and mistakes that had almost wrecked his reputation and family. Sally could see the flaws he attempted to conceal when people weren't paying close attention, even if he had rebuilt some aspects of himself. Her stomach twisted in knots at the idea of those two men sitting down and discovering their common past. Sally knew this town well enough to know that history rarely stayed in the past, instead, it had a way of crashing back into the present with unanticipated effects. She wasn't sure what they would say specifically. The air in Crimson Lights was heavier than normal that night, and Sally wasn't sure if it was because of her own thoughts or because of the faint murmur of chatter that drifted from table to table. Silently, she entered and pretended to check her phone when she noticed Billy sitting in one of the rear booths across from Kane. The tension between them was evident even though they weren't yelling yet, like two men attempting to gauge how far each word would carry them. Even though she could hear the faint rumble of their voices coming toward her, Sally's pulse accelerated as she stepped closer to the counter and pretended to desire coffee. Kane maintained a measured tone, calm in a way that appeared practiced but equally combustible beneath, while Billy pushed forward, his face keen, almost daring Kane to disagree. This was two men with unresolved business, not just two old friends catching up. With a low but powerful Australian accent, Kane stated, "Billy, I'm not here to rehash old battles. I've had enough of getting blamed for everything. I'm not going to sit here and let you drag me through the mud once again since I've admitted my mistakes." Billy shook his head and laughed dryly. "This is about dragging you through the muck, do you think? You literally excavated the mud yourself, Kane, and then expected the others to do the same. You discuss mistakes as though they have already happened, but the truth is that mistakes cause wounds. Furthermore, some of those scars never truly go away, do they?" Every syllable made Sally's chest tighten, and she tightened her jaw. Something told her she needed to hear the talk, but she wanted to turn away and ignore it. Pain, treachery, and possibly even a long-buried secret were hidden beneath the surface of those words. Sally was also aware that everyone nearby could be affected by the aftershocks if Billy was determined to expose it. Kane's eyes darkened as he leaned back, and Sally briefly believed he might leave. Instead, he let out a languid breath, as if he were surrendering to something he had fought for too long. "Do you really believe that I don't have those scars?" Kane whispered. "I recall what I lost every day when I wake up. I lost my marriage, my children's confidence, and the life I had created because I was unable to prevent my mistakes from getting worse. Billy, you don't need to remind me. I am plenty adept at reminding myself." Billy's face softened for the first time, although the resentment was still visible on the edges. Uneasy and torn, he drummed his fingers on the table. "Kane, perhaps that is the issue. You believe that making amends is equivalent to living with guilt. But you left some of us to pick up the pieces. We are still picking them up, some of us." Sally swallowed hard when she realized that what she was hearing was not simply two guys snapping at each other, but rather two men finally expressing their remorse, bitterness, and years of quiet in a way that neither had previously permitted. She couldn't help but feel that it was the moment Genoa City had been waiting for, despite her anxiety about what might happen. The everyday noises that had long served as Sally Spectra's life soundtrack included the delicate rustle of trees outside the window, the distant sound of a television from another room, and the calm hum of the refrigerator. They were the sounds of survival, of a world that she had battled for with all of her strength, one that had been rebuilt from the ashes of past scandals and heartbreaks. Billy and Kane, her husband and son, were the twin pillars at the core of that world. They were the living evidence that her struggles had been worthwhile. They were both her present and her future. But in the course of one modest talk, that well-known melody was overpowered by a low, recurrent tone of fear. The simple, terrible act of Billy and Kane opening up was the cause of this profound change in her emotional environment rather than an unexpected disaster. Their relationship had been guided for years by an unsaid, silent agreement. Kane's past was a sealed room, a turbulent past filled with deceit, secret identities, and the ghost of his father, Ian Ward. Similar compartmentalization applied to Billy's personal difficulties, his tumultuous relationship with his father, his fears, and the burden of being an abbot in a society that demanded perfection. Sally recognized the value of these sections as a master storyteller in both fashion and life. They were created out of a mutually protective instinct rather than dishonesty. To talk about such things was to breathe life into them, to run the risk of their spreading and devouring their family's fragile environment. According to her, Sally's job was to be the curator of their joy, the gatekeeper who made sure the past stayed exactly where it belonged. Therefore, when Billy began to speak with a new, disconcerting openness, it felt less like a discussion and more like the first fracture in a dam. At first, it wasn't the material that was concerning. The layers of Abbott bravado she had always considered his essential armor were removed by the tone, which was one of unadulterated honesty. He described his early years with a fresh, critical perspective that revealed the cracks rather than the typical romantic, well-polished tales saved for family get-togethers. He discussed the subtle ways he felt overshadowed, not just by Billy Abbott I, but by the name he carried, and the ongoing, unseen pressure to live up to his brother's legacy. He admitted to have worries about his own parenting, worries that he was repeating habits that he hadn't even really recognized before. This would have appeared to an observer as healthy development, the kind of emotional maturity that self-help books and therapists promote. Sally, however, was not an outsider. She knew Billy Abbott's lingo like a glove. She could detect the underlying meaning from the hesitancy in his gaze and the set of his jaw. This was more than just venting, it was a fundamental reorganization of how he saw himself. And Sally experienced a chilling knot in her stomach with each revelation. She knew a Billy who was resilient to the point of being stubborn and occasionally cocky. This emotional, self-reflective Billy felt a sense of disconnection. What was to stop him from dismantling the life they had created together if he was dismantling the very pillars of his identity? She was concerned that the shift was a chaotic, unpredictably occurring force that may engulf all in its path, rather than that he was evolving. Kane's openness was the dam itself collapsing, if Billy's was a fissure in the wall. With his past a minefield he had meticulously planned and then avoided, Kane had always been the more cautious of the two. His relationship with his past was one of containment rather than examination. It was horrifying to hear him talk about it now, to express the embarrassment of being Ian Ward's kid and the persistent worry that a dark side was ingrained in his own makeup. He talked about the manipulations, the lies he had told and been told, and the overwhelming feeling of unworthiness that had plagued him long before Sally had entered his life. Sally had only been able to piece these things together from rumors and old headlines. Kane's candor made him look exposed, but Billy's made him seem unmoored. Sally had developed feelings for the guy he had battled to become, the man who had boldly created a life that was in contrast to his background. It seemed as though he was re-inhabiting that old anguish by opening that locked chamber and letting its contents out, giving it a legitimacy and a presence in their home that it had never had before. It was a protective, instinctive terror. She had surrounded him with a stronghold for years, protecting him from criticism from others and, she suspected, from himself. It seemed like a grave strategic blunder to watch him voluntarily tear down those walls. The world did not encourage vulnerability, it was not a kind environment. She felt helpless to shield Kane from the new wounds and the old ghosts that he was becoming vulnerable to by opening up. His vulnerability felt like a rejection of that very love, a declaration that her protection was no longer necessary, or worse, a kind of censorship, because her love for him was so closely linked to her job as his defender. Sally became concerned for a third, more complicated reason as a result of the junction of their separate revelations. Their opening up was a conversation rather than a solitary event. Kane's own ingrained emotions of inadequacy appeared to be echoed by Billy's admissions of insecurity. Beyond the privileged Abbott narrative, Billy was given a fresh, gritty model of perseverance through Kane's tales of survival and reinvention. They were discovering a new, stronger connection in their mutual fragility. And probably the most disturbing of all the developments was this one. Being their center of gravity had been the foundation of Sally's entire universe. She served as their confidant, counselor, and emotional center of gravity. She had been the glue that kept their special trio together, mediated their relationship, and translated their manly silences for each other. They were avoiding the translator now. They were establishing a direct line of communication based on a common language of suffering and insecurity that, by definition, did not include her. She was able to sympathize and listen, but she was unable to really understand the claustrophobia of Billy's gilded history or the weight of Kane's inherited shame. She felt a terrible loneliness blossoming within of her. The dynamic was changing, and she was not sure where she stood in it. If they were building their link through this mutual excavation, where did that leave her? Was she on the edge now? The concern was of emotional obsolescence rather than real desertion. She had no plan for what would happen next, and the character she had spent so much time defining herself by was dissolving before her eyes. Even though their new closeness was healthy for them, it felt like a threat to their family's established structure, which she had been the main architect of. The most profound and inexpressible fear of all was hidden beneath all these layers of anxiety, the fear of contagion. Billy and Kane were not just talking about the past, they were actively bringing it into the present by giving voice to their darkest fears and past traumas. Sally had put in too much effort and made too many sacrifices to make a tidy, well-lit, secure gift for everyone. She had a strong belief in the ability to gaze ahead and outrun the ghosts of the past. It felt risky to keep focusing on the past and to poke at old wounds. They seemed to be extending an invitation to those shadows to join them at the dinner table in their living room. She was concerned that they were overlooking a basic reality in their pursuit of authenticity. There are some things that are better kept unopened for a reason. The past was a volatile force that might upend even the most meticulously planned present. It was not a passive object to be studied under a microscope. Moreover, Sally was compelled to examine herself in an uncomfortable way due to their candor. Her own coping mechanisms were reflected in their courage in facing their issues. She had always opted for deflection when they were choosing dissection. She had cherished control where they sought clarity. Their trip suggested that her approach, the one with the upbeat facade, the calculated silence, and the unrelenting onward motion, was possibly less genuine, even cowardly. It called into question her status as a strong matriarch at its very foundation. What was her unwavering refusal to focus on the negative if their weakness was strength? Was it a weakness of any sort, or was it strength? Her anxiety was exacerbated by this internal tension, which made it difficult for her to express her worries without coming out as conceited or unsupportive. Ultimately, Sally's cause for concern was a complicated web of love, fear, and a last-ditch effort to hold on to the joy she felt they had already earned. It was a fearful reaction to the uncertain repercussions of their development rather than a rejection of it. She was afraid of what may be discovered as she watched the two most significant men in her life conduct a necessary and risky archaeological dig on their own souls. She was concerned about the stability of each of them individually, the changing dynamics of their relationship, and the delicate ecosystem of their family. Above all, she was afraid that in their attempt to better understand themselves, they might unintentionally destroy the lovely, hard-won life they had created together. There was no assurance that the new life would be as robust or even include her in the same manner. They showed courage by opening up, but to Sally, who was on the sidelines, it felt like the start of a conclusion, the opening notes of a requiem for a peace she had spent her entire life fighting for. The concern was a wordless cry into an unknowable future that had come unexpectedly and horrifyingly.